Well, the rumors around the PlayStation 5 are getting a bit out of control right now. We're getting some good information, but it's getting mixed in with like speculation and just overall rumors that I don't know if they even know are 100%. It's kind of all over the place right now. And this happened throughout this week very recently. And at the end of it, we ended up coming to the determination that the PS5 is doing fake 4K, or it's unable to do 4K. Again, it's all over the place right now. And then it turns out that Dust Golem, who was who started this whole thing, seemed to be doing it because there was too much negative Xbox information out there. So they wanted to talk a bit about some of the negative news around the PS5 and development. We'll talk about all this today, guys. And I will explain to you why I think the PS5 could struggle out of the gate with third-party developers, but why it could be kind of smoothed out and figured out as we go through the generation. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like it down below. It does help out a lot. And if you're new here, hit that red subscribe button down below as we head towards what's going to be, I think, a pretty fun second half of August, especially going into September. Should be a lot of things from all three companies, so good stuff there. Let's go over here to Tweaktown, who summarized this very, very well. And I want to also talk about what Jeff Grubb said, because I think he explained it the best that he could without being a developer. As he said himself, he's not a developer, but I think he pointed to the reasoning around the PS5 maybe having some issues out of the gate compared to the Series X when it comes to 4K, and we end up with fake 4K and all of this. But this really kicked off with Dusk Golem, who decided to talk about Resident Evil 8 and the PlayStation 5. Now, they do say upfront, Resident Evil 8 will run fine on launch, okay? So that was never in question by them there, but they go on here to say people should get ready for the really real possibility that the PS5 is going to end up being the more expensive console between the two. I'm trying not to say much here as I was asked not to, but prepare yourself, which does put Xbox Series X in a position it'll be the less expensive, more powerful console. So right off the bat, I think the PS5 and the Series X are both going to be $500. Just straight up. I think Sony decided, instead of going all out with a system that's, as Sony or Microsoft says, 12 teraflops, they decided to take some of the R&D and the money and put it elsewhere, like the SSD, this audio engine they keep talking about. Those are the things that I think were more important to them, whereas Microsoft was like 12 teraflops, drop it in. They're still in an SSD, but it's not as fast as the PS5. And again, we need to see all the games and actually play it to see if there are any real differences between them. But 500, I think, across the board. I think Microsoft will have the advantage when it comes to the lower end market, with the Series S probably being about 300. That should be unveiled relatively soon. And there is always the possibility that the digital PS5 would be like 450. So there's going to be pricing options kind of all over the place. But as for the top of the line, 500, I think most of us are expecting that at this point. Now, they say I use Resident Evil 8 as an example, but I've heard from other devs that PS5 struggles with 4K games in particular, associate a lot of fake 4K. That doesn't matter to some, but get ready for that too. Xbox Series X doesn't have the same problem. So, would the PS5 have a harder time with 4K games than the Series X? Most likely, yes, because the Series X is just a more powerful system. Now, would the cutoff of, like, as we see the PS5 get over 10 teraflops, would that cutoff mean that like they'll both do native 4K, but maybe one has a harder time with frame rate? It drops into like the mid 50s or something. Not enough to really notice. Yeah, that's also very possible, because we could be over that threshold where it's like, well, they can both do 4K. Or if it's just a locked 60, would like the PS5 drop down, to like 1800p or something for a few seconds? Yeah, that's also very possible, right? So I think we need to see it in practice before we can say, well, this is just, it's doing 1080p over here. What's going on, right? I thought this was next gen. So that's going to be something that people will have to rely on Digital Foundry to tell them, because otherwise, most people, I think, when they see checkerboard 4K, don't necessarily immediately go, well, this is just checkerboard. I can't handle this. What's going on? A lot of people, because they're playing the game and focusing on the game itself. Let's say Horizon Zero Dawn. That game runs at a low resolution, checkerboard's up. Spider-Man, same thing. Most people think those games look great. So, yeah, it'll be interesting when the game comes out and then Digital Foundry drops their analysis after a game comes out to see if opinion changes around that. Anyway, I think Jeff Grubb did a better job explaining this overall. Now, later on, Dust Golem, like I said, mentioned that they had put some negative PlayStation news apparently out there because there was so much negative Xbox news with Halo Infinite being like delayed. Listen, Microsoft will be okay, all right? They'll wipe away the tears with $100 bills and they'll move on, okay? You don't have to worry about them too much. So, but Jeff Grubb said, this is on a podcast, said the technology that Sony is using for the PS5 is AMD Smart Shift, and a lot of people are just assuming the PS5 is going to be right there with the Xbox Series X, and it may be. I don't know for sure. I'm not a developer. But this Smart Shift tech is worrisome, I think. What it does is it moves power between the CPU and the GPU, and developers really haven't had to worry about that, especially on consoles in the past. So if you remember, we had that hour-long session that some people use to catch up on their sleep with Mark Cerny explaining about the new paradigm around the PS5. That being that instead of having a solid straight up frequency like we've seen with the Series X, where they said, oh yeah, it's like 3.5 gigahertz or it's 3.8 gigahertz, just sustained, right? The PlayStation 5's frequency will change quite a bit, okay? They showed a whole chart of it moving all over the place, but the power delivery will stay the same. Basically, we would have a system where the frequency will sustain, and then we'll have power going in being different at times, right, to the whole thing, right? It's calling power, and that's why we had Sony release a PlayStation 4 Pro that would have a hard time judging with how much cooling the system needed, and you would get, as Mark Cerny said himself, the axe effect from God of War, where the thing would try to take off into outer space. They wanted to make the power delivery much more predictable, as they say, so that they can account for it in R&D and eventually production, as is happening now. So it's different. They're going a different way to get the CPU and the GPU what it needs, the resources, in order to, of course, have the game play on your screen. So this is something that AMD, I guess with Sony, it seems, had to develop Smart Shift. Now, Smart Shift, as is explained, will move power, and this is, oh, look, TweetTown has a nice little chart here for us. We'll move power between the CPU, the GPU, as it's needed. So power is coming in sustained, right, with the PS5, and then Smart Shift is like, well, all this stuff is being drawn in, there's AI going on, the CPU needs more power, we're going to move it over there for now, okay, split second, and now the GPU is drawn, now we need shaders are popping up, we're getting ray tracing and all stuff, let's move some back to the GPU, so it is pushing power back and forth quite a bit, right, and that's something that wasn't really, I guess, worked on or accounted for in development as we are hearing and it's being described. So obviously Smart Shift, which recently started showing up earlier this year apparently in some of their own APUs to kind of manage power that way, is new. So like developers are going to look at this and say, well, this isn't how we've really been doing things. And Smart Shift being so new could have some bugs or some issues, or may just not be as efficient and would evolve throughout the generation coming up. So maybe to account for that, you would see 4K checkerboarding at times in games, right? Especially from a third party who's trying to account for the differences between how the Series X accounts for things, whether it's like the power going in will just change constantly and the frequency will stay sustained. That's how they've been doing it. Whereas they're doing it backwards with the PlayStation 5. It's very different, and I guess it's mostly for Sony to kind of alter the way the PS5 works so it could fit into what they wanted, which is a system that has a very, very fast SSD, next level audio, and just enough, I would say, to get them to what they want, which for first parties will probably be just 4K, right? They're going to shoot for it. The first-party developers have had access to the PS5 technology with Smart Shift and all this stuff much longer, especially if Sony and AMD were developing this technology, this Smart Shift, while the PS5 was in development, which, I mean, we've heard about them working together on different technologies as these things are in R&D. Wouldn't shock me if Smart Shift came about because Sony needed it. And AMD is like, well, we helped create it. Let's use it in a laptop or something else within APU. So Jeff Grubb goes on to say specifically third parties. You'd have NBA, you'd have Madden, you have Call of Duty. Those could all run at lower resolutions or frame rates initially. But as Smart Shift continues to evolve and improve, you could eventually see the PS5 just be like much better in terms of resolution and frame rate. And that happens every generation anyway. If you think about it, every time a system comes out, we always look at the first generation, or we'll say the first few games of that generation. And then we look at the games that come out at the end of the generation, and they look so much better, right? That's just because developers get better with that system as they go along, because they'll be using it for, we assume, 6 to 7 years. So by the end, they're pretty good with it, right? And they move on to the next generation and kind of restart that cycle a bit. But the Series X is what they've grown to know at this point. The PS5 is just going to be a bit of a different learning curve for them. So we'll see what happens as we go along here. But I assume Capcom probably has it figured out, since that's like Resident Evil 8 was, I guess, developed for PS4 and Xbox One initially, and then they made the shift internally midway through to shift over to next gen. And then apparently the last gen ones were canceled, and then I hear they might not be. I'm going to expect a PS5 and Series X only Resident Evil 8, and if the originals show up for the PS4 and the Xbox One, it would just be a pleasant surprise. But let me know what you guys think about this PS5 situation down below. And I'm curious how many people would be that annoyed if it was like 1800p checkerboard up to 4K, right? Like to 2160p. Is that something that would really annoy people because it's next gen? Or do you think most people just wouldn't even notice and they would just be like, oh, well, yeah, but it's also a locked frame rate of 30 or 60, depending, if it has to be cinematic. But let me know what you guys think about that whole thing down below. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.